Okay. Um, so tonight we're going to continue our study of the Gospel of St. Mark. And if some of you are wondering why I'm not dressed as you normally see me, it's because our heat is not existing right now. So I I wasn't going to wear a lighter robe. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, as you can see. Um, that's why. Um, if and then if you're wondering if I have any affiliation with Harvard, I grew up 10 minutes away from the square. So that's about as close as I am with them. Um, okay, so the Gospel of St. Mark, I believe we left off at verse, I think we finished through 17. And that last verse was when Jesus says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And that's his encounter with St. Matthew, who prior to becoming a disciple was a tax collector. And we talked, I think, about the notoriety of tax collectors back in antiquity and how they worked for the Roman government and how they extortioned money from people and kept a lot of that money for themselves. And we see a change of heart in Matthew. And basically, it's Matthew's entrance into discipleship. So I think then we are on verse 18 of chapter 2. And this is when Jesus is confronted, and the disciples of Jesus are confronted with fasting. So, can someone read for us verses 18 through 22, please?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Can read it. The disciples of John and of the Pharisees were fasting. Then they came and said to him, "Why do the disciples of John and of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins."
Okay. Thank you. So here we have the disciples of John the Baptist. They're And the Pharisees themselves were fasting. Now, in antiquity, there were 2 days of fasting. There was Monday and there was Thursday. Monday and Thursday were the days the Jews typically fasted. We know this from the ancient church order known as the Didache, or in improper Erasmian pronunciation, Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles. The Didache says that the Christians are to fast on Wednesday and Friday, and not on the days when the unbelievers fast. The unbelievers in that church order are the Jews. The Jews fasted on market days. These were the days when they would normally go to the markets to barter or to buy goods or supplies or food. And at the same time, they would go first, actually, to the synagogue in the morning. And these were days of fasting. And they're associated with the life, with the old Mosaic law. It was on Monday that Moses had gone up, it is believed, according to tradition, had gone up to Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law from Yahweh. And then on Thursday, he received the tablets themselves, or he was coming back down to the people. So these are the days, Monday and Thursday being the fast days. So um, they came to Jesus and said to him, the Pharisees are fasting, and John's disciples are fasting, but your disciples do not fast. So immediately there's a kind of a countercultural dilemma. Everyone here in this setting is a Jew. Jews were expected to fast. And the expectation is from the Old Testament, it's the old law. And Jesus responds here by saying, by first of all identifying himself as the bridegroom. Now, the Jews who are confronting him do not understand right away what he means by this. But he uses the example and says that if someone is friends with the groom of a wedding, um, if the bridegroom is with them, so like for example, you go to a wedding and they've got all kinds of food and everyone's celebrating and having a good time. Are you going to sit off in a corner and say, no, I just want lentils and bread? Right? Naturally, no, because everyone is celebrating. It's a celebratory time, right? You walk into a restaurant and you don't say, no, I just want some dried fruits and vegetables, right? If you're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to eat something more filling. And the idea of sitting together at table is to celebrate. So if one is celebrating, there's no fasting. And there's an important liturgical lesson here too that I'll get to here in a few minutes. Um, so Jesus is saying, while the friends of the bridegroom are with him, can they fast? If the bridegroom is with them and they're celebrating in his presence, celebrating his teaching, celebrating his presence, his love, it's not compatible. You can't celebrate and fast at the same time. It's a common sense kind of thing. Both are incompatible. But then Jesus says in verse 20, but the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. So this is referring, of course, to his arrest, to his betrayal and his arrest and his passion and his death. In those days, when the bridegroom is taken away, then he says, they will fast in those days. So liturgically, we know that, I'm just going to make two comments here. First, when we fast, fasting is done in preparation for a celebration, or fasting is done as a way of mourning the loss of something. When in antiquity, in Judaism, if a person, if a loved one passed away, whether it was a father or a mother, in the worst case scenario, a child, the family would spend several weeks of mourning. Part of the mourning that they would experience was fasting. They would eat unprepared foods, very raw kinds of foods. They would not dress themselves up as they would to go to the temple or to the synagogue. They would wear ragged clothes. They would wear sackcloth, the men, on their bodies. The women would have their hair um, uh, not not propped up. They would just let their hair long and they wouldn't cover their head. So these were all examples of mourning practices, and part of those mourning practices was to fast. Liturgically, for us, when we're fasting, we are preparing for a celebration. So this often becomes a little tricky during Lent, and especially during the week when the fast that normally people have or experience is an all-day fast that normally is broken by the liturgy, by the liturgy of the presanctified gifts. The liturgy of the presanctified gifts is a vesperal service of communion. It is a divine liturgy. It's considered one of the three main Byzantine rites, Eucharistic rites. And so when people celebrate with the priest the presanctified liturgy, after receiving communion, their fast is broken, which means that they will take their only meal of the day right after communion. So as soon as someone receives communion, the fast is broken. That ties in to the fact that when we receive communion, we receive the bridegroom. The bridegroom comes back to us. Christ comes to us. He enters into us in Holy Communion. So then there is no fasting. There's a practice, and here I'm just going to give you to explain on Holy Saturday. Now, many of you who are new to Orthodoxy may not be aware of this, but on Holy Saturday, we have a practice of having a divine liturgy in the morning, on Holy Saturday morning. The purpose of this service is to allow people to receive communion who have been fasting during the week, during Holy Week. And there is a misnomer that this liturgy is actually a liturgy that breaks the fast. But this liturgy should never have to take place. What I mean by that is this liturgy doesn't belong to Holy Week because, this liturgy doesn't belong to Holy Saturday. Holy Saturday is the only Saturday of the day when there is a strict fast, right? So what happens is we have the divine liturgy on Saturday, on Holy Saturday. People receive communion. And then again, I think a lot of the cradle Orthodox may remember this on the call, but as soon as people would receive communion on Holy Saturday morning, they'd go out for bacon and eggs, or just have a really substantial breakfast. And that is completely wrong. Wrong because we are still in the day of Holy Saturday. Out of convenience, it's done on Saturday because people can receive communion in the morning. They don't have to fast the entire day of Holy Saturday. And most people are not used to having an evening liturgy on Holy Saturday. What they do is they have the midnight liturgy at midnight. And so what happens is there is confusion here, and there's impropriety. We begin fasting on Holy Saturday morning. We receive communion, right? And then we eat and break the fast. And then if we want to receive communion at the midnight service, we fast again. And we fast because we've already received communion, which we shouldn't have done. So you're going to say, great, Father, so how do we solve this? I've advocated time and time again that the Archdiocese, and again, it's a matter of getting people used to doing something that is an ancient practice, and people are just not used to. So what do is we try to offer conveniences to people. So what we do is we have people receive communion on Saturday, and then we can tell them, well, now you need to fast because Holy Saturday morning is not a resurrection service. We're still in a fasting period. If you tell people that, they won't listen to you. They'll simply say, but I received communion so I can eat. That's how I grew up. So basically, we've taught the people incorrectly, and we've created a problem because we're allowing people to eat in between communion from Holy Saturday to Easter Sunday. So my suggestion in all of this, and it is important because it's from an Orthodox perspective, it's improper. And it's sloppy theology. It's sloppy orthodoxy. What I have advocated is that the liturgy of Holy Saturday morning should be moved to the afternoon. Afternoon meaning the late afternoon, which is normally when this liturgy would take place. There is no liturgy for Holy Saturday. It's a day of mourning. There's no celebration on Holy Saturday. We're anticipating the resurrection of the Lord. So by pushing this liturgy into the afternoon, into the late afternoon, this liturgy is now the vigil liturgy. It's the vigil liturgy where the catechumens of the church were baptized. So catechumens were baptized at this liturgy, and when they received communion, they received their first Holy Communion at this liturgy. And whatever other faithful were there, they would receive communion as well. So what does that do? That means that you're fasting from Holy Friday all the way through Holy Saturday, and you're breaking your fast at the liturgy, at the evening liturgy. If you look at the hymnology of the liturgy of this divine liturgy, the hymns are all resurrectional. But why are we listening to resurrectional hymns on a day of mourning when it's Holy Saturday morning? The liturgical day of Pascha begins on Holy Saturday evening. We're fasting up until that time. We fast and then we break our fast by receiving Holy Communion at that liturgy. That liturgy is a liturgy for the catechumens to be baptized. On Holy Sunday at Pascha, the Holy Sunday morning liturgy, we do at midnight. So normally, if we've received communion at the vigil liturgy, really, then there's no point to receive communion again during the same liturgical day. Part of that issue, of course, is that the catechumens that have been baptized, they receive their first Holy Communion at the evening liturgy, at the vigil liturgy. And the Orthodox Christians receive their communion in the morning on Sunday morning liturgy. We've now made it the practice that if you receive on Holy Saturday, since we don't have catechumens being baptized necessarily on Holy Saturday, and we do it in the morning, then it's like, okay, well, you can receive communion now and you can receive communion then. And that's just sloppy. It's sloppy liturgy. We've become so, especially here in America and in Greece, don't think in Greece it's any different, and in Romania, we want to accommodate people's schedules. But in doing so, we've bastardized the whole process of the whole cycle of fasting, celebrating, fasting, celebrating. I mean, here we are, we're reading scripture and we're saying, when the bridegroom has been taken away, then people will fast. Well, the bridegroom has been taken away on Holy Saturday. He's in the tomb. And why are we going out for bacon and eggs? Because we've allowed the people to have communion on Holy Saturday morning, because that's what they're used to. And we don't want to upset anyone who's going to come to the church. And we certainly don't want to upset someone who's going to make a $1 million, $2 million donation to the church and upset them because they're used to sloppy liturgy. You see what I'm saying? And again, I feel very passionate about this because we're doing this incorrectly. And by saying we, I mean the Archdiocese, the bishops, the clergy. I have had a lot of clergy and other bishops address this with me, and I tell them, look, I'm informing you, this is your decision to make, but if your bishop allows you leeway to have an evening liturgy, do it. Don't confuse the people. Don't turn the divine liturgy of the church and the liturgical cycle of the church into a convenience. Liturgy is not supposed to be convenient. Liturgy is supposed to be done in a way that is in a dignified manner that allows people to make the proper provisions for themselves. A lot of the people, too, that I remember growing up in Boston, a lot of the people would, the priest would have a liturgy at 9 o'clock. But then what would he do? He would open the church from 6 to 9 and allow people to come to church. He would commune people from the reserved sacrament. So he had no liturgy to produce communion, as it were. He just used the reserved sacrament. The clergy are not to use the reserved sacrament, except in cases of emergency, if someone is dying. We have Holy Communion, and so we cannot celebrate a liturgy, so we can have communion then to go and to give to someone who is dying. So the reserved sacrament is used only for emergencies. Communing 800 or 500 or 600 people is not an emergency because they work during the week. So what did the Metropolitan do there? He said, I don't care. He says, no one is to receive communion from the reserved sacrament. You are, if your people are used to receiving communion before work, you get up early, you start liturgy at 5 in the morning, and you do a divine liturgy, and then have the people come to that liturgy, because the churches would fill up like by 7:30 before people would go to work. People were already in church. And so people would receive communion at that liturgy. So the priest would begin the liturgy, but then what would happen? The people wouldn't stay for the liturgy. As soon as they received communion. They didn't even read the Thanksgiving prayers. And it was just McDonald's. It was fast food, in and out. That's sloppy liturgy. And what we've done in this is we've tried to be convenient to accommodate people. We try to be accommodating, but the people haven't grown into their spiritual life. They've taken communion to be something that I receive it, I'm good with God, I'm fine. Now I can go sin and eat, drink, and do all kinds of atrocities. There's a big disconnect there. And that is a betrayal of our tradition. That is a betrayal of the church and of the Christian faith. So my advocacy has been, it's a matter of teaching people. It's a matter of helping them to rethink things. And thus why in our community, I've made the point over and over again, and I'm very thankful that we have such amazing people in our community who are willing to learn, to listen, to research, because that's what I do. I mean, I've been a pastor 33 years, and I've been an academic as much. And I can't go to a church and just say, okay, you know what? I'm going to do what the people want. That's not me. That might be someone else, Father so-and-so, but that's not Father Stelyios. Father Stelyios, whatever I do, I back it up with academic precision. So I make sure that you get the full story. You get the proper practice. I want people to understand why it is we do the things we do, because you deserve to know. You deserve to know. This is our tradition. So anyway, I made a whole spiel about this, but I think it's important because when we look at this passage, it's talking about fasting and the bridegroom, right? And so the bridegroom has been taken away on Holy Saturday, right? And what are we doing? Oh, we receive communion and then we're not fasting. So there's a disconnect there. We fast in preparation to receive the bridegroom. And then when the bridegroom comes, it's time for us to celebrate. That's why even during Lent on Sunday, when we receive communion at church, we break the fast. Even though we might eat certain fasting foods, we still eat. You cannot receive communion and then immediately relegate to fasting. You cannot fast after communion. To do so is a disobedience and a dishonor to the Lord. Because it's kind of like saying, okay, I received communion, but I want to be miserable again. Well, did you receive Christ? Yes. Why aren't you rejoicing? Because I want to fast. Well, what's greater? The reception of the Lord and the joyfulness of the celebration, Or are we going to become slaves to the rules of fasting? Remember what Jesus also says, um, the Sabbath was made for us. We weren't made to fit into the rules of the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So fasting, when the bridegroom is with us, when we receive communion, it is a time of great celebration. And then we begin that cycle again, where Wednesday and Friday, we recall the day when Jesus was betrayed and the day when Jesus was crucified for our salvation. And we recall his sojourn in the ground, in the tomb, in the sepulcher for Saturday, and then his resurrection on Sunday. And part of that too, what I also wanted to make a point about is that it's so important for us as Orthodox to understand the importance of being joyful. The Eucharist is, and this takes some getting used to, I suppose, but a lot of people who approach the Eucharist approach out of a sense of guilt, or out of a sense of, weakness. And it's true, we are weak, and yes, we are sinners, but we should also temper those feelings with the joyfulness that God is with us. I feel in many ways that in the church, and I'm speaking generally, we've lost that sense of joyfulness, that sense of happiness. We go to church, and I mean, I've seen this in other churches. When people come to church and their heads are down, like, what did you do? Did you kill someone? They're in misery. And I understand people have hard weeks, and we all do, and we have difficult days. But, put your chin up, rejoice. Christ is risen. And there's nothing that there's nothing we cannot not achieve because Christ is with us. We say at every divine liturgy, having beheld the resurrection of Christ. After we receive him, that's the first thing we say. Having beheld the resurrection of Christ, let us worship the Holy Lord Jesus, the only Holy One. He's with us. And so that joyfulness must be, must be fervent in our hearts. When the Christians left the church, they would sing. They would sing, may the Lord, blessed be the name of the Lord. We say that in the Divine Liturgy. It's one of the hymns. But they would sing this out in the street, in Africa, in places like Uganda and Kenya. When the Divine Liturgy ends and the people have received communion, there is a procession that the people do, and they sing their own religious hymns in their native language, like Swahili or whatever their native language is in that country, and they dance in the church, and they walk and process out of the church with great joyfulness and happiness. And that's a cultural thing. That's cultural, and it's been incorporated by the Orthodox Church to allow the African people to express this joy. How much more so those of us who live in this great country, who have utmost freedom, and not just freedom, but the freedom to be joyful. How much joy should we have as well, and be able to express that? So there's a particular mentality that has to pervade. Orthodoxy is characterized by, yes, a sense of seriousness, because the seriousness of sin, granted. It's characterized by the sense of mystery, but it's often not characterized by the joyfulness in embracing that mystery, the joyfulness of Christ. So there has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance. We can't go one way. We can't go, more one way. We have to be balanced, appreciating the mystery, understanding the seriousness of our faults, but also being joyful, knowing that Christ is risen and that we will be risen with him. And there's nothing that God cannot fix in us. So that joyfulness has to always be present. I'm going to stop there because I know I've said a lot and I've given you a lot of information with regard to fasting and the liturgical cycle, the fasting, what we call the festal fasting cycle. We do one and then the other, and then one and then the other. Um, so let me stop there and see if you have questions or any thoughts. Feel free to unmute and ask. Oh, okay. Sandy here is asking, can you please go over the different levels of fasting? Okay. So I'll answer that question, but is there another question on what we've talked about already? Is what I said, does it make sense? Do you all see the dilemma and why we need to be balancing the joyfulness with the seriousness of orthodoxy? The- Okay. I see based on the questions, I see we're focusing on rules. So, okay, so let it be. Let's so go over the different levels of fasting and then what can we eat on Sundays during Lent? Okay. Um, with regard to um, the different levels of fasting, there is a book. I'm going to put it in the chat. It is by the late Metropolitan Kallistos Ware and Mother Mary. And it's called the Lenten Triodion. It's out of print as far as I know, but I've been using it with I've introduced our second team of catechumens at the parish, and there is the opening chapter written by um, then Father Kallistos Ware. The bishop writes on the rules of fasting, and he goes into a very comprehensive description of this tradition. So I'm going to try to be very succinct with the rules. So there are two ways to look at fasting. There is what's called a qualitative fast and a quantitative fast. The rules of fasting that we have been developed over the centuries, especially within the rules that we have today have been developed within monastic settings. That means that the monks and nuns have developed these disciplinary practices for their respective monasteries. Every monastery has more or less follows a kind of an unwritten tradition of fasting. But if you go from one monastery to another, you may see some differences or some not really major differences, but some nuanced kind of differences. For example, some monasteries may have a stricter uh, um, diet of fasting. Others may have different qualitative or different quantitative kinds of fasting. Um, So the Wednesday and Friday fast that you've heard me talk about in the Vivahi, that fast predates the monastic rules that we're going to talk about here in a moment. The Wednesday and Friday fast essentially meant that the Christians would not eat anything at all on Wednesday and eat nothing at all on Friday. They would not even consume water. They would not have any conjugal relations with spouses. They would wait until the evening at sundown when the early Christians, usually the father, was given the permission in a family to commune himself and his family, his wife and his children, through the reserved sacrament that Christians would bring from the Sunday Eucharist to their homes. So what later became the pre-sanctified liturgy that we do. So when did they do this? They did it at sundown. They would receive communion, and then after receiving communion as a family, they would sit down and have their only meal of the day. That was the Wednesday fast. The same thing they did on Friday. Oftentimes they combined that Wednesday and Friday fast with reading about the betrayal of Judas and the passion of Christ. So this was the Wednesday, Friday fast. As the centuries developed historically, I won't bore you with all the details. As the church began to grow, disciplinary practices also grew, developed. People were now going to monasteries after the 4th century, and there, in addition to fasting practices now being observed for 40 days by catechumens who were preparing to become Christians, to become Orthodox, they would now fast for 40 days. So the Wednesday, Friday fast was still done outside of Lent. During Lent, when the catechumens were preparing to be baptized, they would fast. And then the Christians also began to fast in solidarity with the catechumens. As the Christians were fasting, they began to observe what monks were doing and nuns were doing in their respective monasteries. So what the church kind of garnered over several centuries was different levels of fasting. So what we have today are essentially 4 levels, if you will, of fasting. The top, well, outside of the 4 levels, there's the non-fasting, which means we can eat anything: meat, dairy, eggs, food, um, meat, just anything, wine, oil, cheese, I mean, anything at all. You can eat anything. The first level of fasting then is to remove all meat. To remove all meat. That would be red meat, white meat, like chicken, ground beef, that kind of thing. Anything that comes from an animal that has blood. The second tier is to remove meat and dairy products, including eggs, right? Cheese, milk, that kind of thing. The third tier is to remove meat, dairy, but to allow fish, right? To allow fish that also has blood. So with the fish, they can also have olive oil and wine in that tier. The next tier is to remove fish and oil, but to have shellfish, crustaceans, right? Like lobster or crab or, I don't know, scallops, I guess. Yeah. And then the final tier is what's called xerophagia, or dry eating. That means you don't have any of the above foods, and all you have is bread, dried fruit, nuts, food that is not prepared. It's just what do you call it? Raw foods. That's the strictest form of fasting. Now, that's the qualitative fast. Those are the levels. Then we also have what's called the quantitative fast, and that goes together with the qualitative fast. The quantitative fast means during periods of Lent, you limit the number of meals you take a day. If you are if you're observing a strict fast on Wednesday and Friday throughout the year, your qualitative fast would be one of these tiers, and then you would take your only meal of the day, usually in the evening. But that would imply that you went the entire day and probably had communion, which normally people don't, since we don't have pre-sanctified liturgies during the year. So you could take your only meal in the evening. Another example of a quantitative fast is outside of Lent, you could have 2 meals during the day instead of 3. 3 is when you're not fasting at all. 2 is when you're fasting outside of Lent on Wednesday and Friday. 1 meal is when you're in Lent. That's the quantitative fast. Now, these all sound like, okay, how do I remember all of these things? You don't need to remember them. That's why you have spiritual fathers. You approach your priest. Your priest will go over with you the various tiers of fasting. Maybe they won't go over them as detailed as you hear me going over them, but we would discuss them, and then you would plug yourself into a particular fast. The purpose of the fasting is not to follow rules because you want to feel holier. Fasting doesn't make you holy at all. Fasting builds discipline to allow the grace of God to begin the process of making you holy. So fasting is done as a disciplinary practice. We try to discipline our bodies so our minds can focus on Christ. When we become hungry and tired, we come to realize that there's only one person that we can only be dependent on, and that is God. I mean, that is the Lord Jesus Christ. So fasting helps to build discipline. It helps to build character, patience, and all those virtues. Fasting does all of these things, and it also helps us to prepare for Holy Communion, right? It does help us to prepare Holy Communion. So when you want to fast, it's something that you need to discuss with your father confessor, with your spiritual father. There is no point to simply say, okay, well, Father talked about it. I can read Metropolitan Kallistos Ware's book, and I'll just put myself in a discipline. Do not do that. That is suicide. Why do I say that? It's because you're not priests, and you haven't experienced the fullness of the spiritual life. Whereas the priest who's been trained, not just through seminary, but through experience, through life events, and so forth, he has a better knowledge, and he can understand. He has insights that you don't have regarding fasting, regarding your own life. And so within the context of confession, usually is when these discussions can take place. So it is important to speak with your spiritual father about putting yourself in a discipline of fasting. Fasting is also extremely helpful because it's a way of physically and medically detoxifying the body. We have a lot of germs inside of us, and we have a lot of toxins inside of us. My wife and I both practice intermittent fasting, which is a phenomenal way. We found it to be safe. We've discussed it with our doctors, and we find it to be a very effective way of keeping our numbers where they ought to be. But it also helps to detoxify the body. It removes toxins from the body. You stay hydrated, and it's important because God gave us a body to take care of, and so we need to take care of our bodies so that we can be around for others, right? So it's a great way to detoxify the body. It's a great way to also remove spiritual toxins from us. You cannot just fast only. We must combine fasting with prayer. Prayer has to be consistent. It has to be daily. If you're just going to fast and not pray, then congratulations, you're doing a great diet. because that's all fasting is a diet. But it's not meant to be a diet. It's meant to be a um, a way by which we make ourselves vulnerable to the grace of God so that God can do great things through us. When the disciples asked Jesus, why couldn't we cast that demon out? And Jesus, remember, already gave his disciples authority as his followers to remove demons, to do exorcisms. We couldn't do it. Why? And he said, this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting. If you want to be exorcists, you need to fast and you need to pray. If you want to raise people from the dead, you need to fast and you need to pray. If you want to heal people, you need to fast and you need to pray. That applies to everyone who has received the grace of the Holy Spirit, not just the priest, not just monks, but all people. So I wanted to say that, and I hope that is helpful. I'm looking here at a bunch of questions here. What can we eat on Sundays during Lent? So again, during Lent, Sundays typically, again, the book Metropolitan Kallistos Ware book, Lenten Triodion, will say that during Lent, since Sunday is not a fast day, it's modified during Lent, however, so we can have two meals that day. So we can have brunch after communion, and then we can have an evening meal because we are still in the Sunday, the day of the Lord's resurrection. On Sunday, we are allowed to go into the tier of wine and oil. Okay, wine and oil. So and shellfish for that matter. The tier right above that is fish, but we don't normally have fish on the Sundays of Lent, except on March 25th, which is the feast, of course, of the Annunciation of Panagia. That day, we can have fish and wine and oil because it is a festal day. It's obviously a very important day, our Lord's conception. So the church allows us to have a celebration, even though it's during Lent, regardless of what day it falls, the 25th. But normally, oil, oil, shellfish, bread, that kind of stuff. People can be creative too, but normally that's the tier and two meals a day for the Sundays during Lent. Let's see, Sarah, I feel like the attitudes towards communion really resonated with me. As a catechumen, I look forward to taking communion for the first time, but I admit that I am nervous, scared. Focusing on the joy and the celebration of receiving Christ for the first time made me think of it differently. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's communion. We use a lot of language, a lot of the language that we find in the writings of the church fathers. They speak to the seriousness of and the power of communion, right? So there is a kind of fear, like we talk about, how the priest says, with the fear of God, with faith and love. And we take that fear, and it's meant in a good way that we are to respect God, right? We are to respect and see God. This is who God is. This is who we are. There's a big gap between us. But that does not mean that we eclipse the joy, right? There's a joyfulness. Jesus is calling us to him. So we'll come up to him and he'll take one look at us and say, yep, just as I knew, just as I thought, you're a sinner, but you're such a lovable sinner. And I love you. And you know what? Come here, let me give you a big bear hug and receive communion. The joyfulness. We know who we are. It would be worse if we see ourselves as sinners and we don't turn to him out of shame. That would be worse, because then it's like we're saying, I want to live two lives. I want to be with God, but I feel so guilty and so bad and unclean that I just don't want to approach him. So, but Christ rejoices when he sees us fixing our situation, when we allow him to help us to become better people. There's a joyfulness, there's a celebration. Remember the prodigal son, everyone was miserable. The father was miserable. In all likelihood, in the parable, that story, the father probably fasted because his son was away. He was mourning, he was in mourning. And when the son comes back, the father is ecstatic, he's joyful. He kills the fatted calf and says, let's throw a party. There's a joyfulness in approaching Christ, the joyfulness of, yeah, that's who I am, but I want to be better. I want to be a little better today than yesterday, a little better tomorrow than today. And Christ wants us to embrace that, you know. And communion, true, right? Communion is not a prize, we must remember. You know, a lot of people treat it like, oh, I receive communion, and so I'm rewarded for fasting. I mean, there could be people who fast perfectly and yet are just pure mean and miserable. It's their hearts haven't really become fertile for Christ to enter their hearts. They're great, and they feel like, oh, we can just, we just have a prize. I receive a prize. But the purpose is that no one deserves communion. And yet it is by the grace of God that we receive it. Because God is not going to say no. We will say no faster than Christ will say no. Christ will not say no to us, so long as we come humbly, willing to become better. Christ doesn't want perfect people. Christ wants us to understand that we are sinners, but that we are also very lovable. Christ wants us to come to him with that attitude. So it's not a prize. St. Ignatius of Antioch calls it a medicine. We come because we need medicine. We need to become better. Look at what Jesus says, right? Just before that, in earlier. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. He did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So communion is a medicine. It's there to help us be better, not to receive a prize. I mean, think about the sporting events that take place. They're kind of silly if you think about it, because every year, unless you're, I guess, the LA Dodgers, but they won 2 World Series in a row. That doesn't mean they're the best team in baseball. That just means they're the best team. They were the best team this year and the best team last year. Look at the Boston Celtics, my favorite sports team. Back in the 60s, they won the championship 9 years out of 10 in a row. People got sick of the Celtics, of watching them win every year. Who's going to win this year? Oh, the Celtics, of course. But the point is that doesn't mean they're the best team ever. It just means they had a good year. And so next year they may not have a good year. So I don't come to receive communion to get a prize and say I'm all set for the year. I come to church because I need to become better. I'm always striving to be better, to become stronger. And that's what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to constantly fight to become better. And Joseph asks here, does this take place during confession, or can we approach you at coffee hour to speak of fasting? So either or. I think with confession, it's the problem with coffee hour is that I'm going to be interrupted. In confession, that's private time, that's our time. So that's a great way to address the practice of fasting. It's also good because along with fasting, right now we're kind of doing general comments. I'm making general comments on fasting, but fasting has to be kind of catered to each person because every person has different needs and there are different levels. So I'm speaking generically here and just kind of giving you general rules. But if you're going to be discussing fasting, it needs to happen one-on-one, because along with fasting comes prayer. If I discuss fasting rules with you, I have to also discuss to see what your prayer rule is like. Both go together. So it's probably better. I think it's more effective and more fair for you. And I think for me also to discuss it during confession rather than, okay, so Joseph wants to talk about fasting. All right, I'll spend 10 minutes there, and then we get interrupted like 3 times. It's kind of like, so I think confession is probably the best way. Nikki, Father, are there any celebratory hymns that you recommend we can start singing, leaving church to be more joyful? Absolutely. Um, so there are hymns that the church has. One hymn that we do is Blessed be the name of the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. That was sung. That was the traditional hymn that was sung by the people as they were leaving church. That exists in various modes and tones. So if you look that up, that hymn, you'll find it sung in many ways. Another thing that you could also do is to take a psalm that you really like, and to sing that psalm as you're processing out of the church. One of these is the communion hymn. The communion hymn of "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. For His mercy endures forever. Alleluia." Another hymn that, and I don't think they're on the call tonight, but Joseph, since you're going to be taking the Byzantine music class, I'm hoping that Amy Hogue, who does the lessons, will introduce you to the hymn "O Lady Pure, O Lady Pure Immaculate," the Agni Parthene hymn that Saint Nectarios wrote. That is a hymn that is sung by choirs as people are walking out after receiving communion. I would very much like our choir that is developing, that is growing, to learn that hymn. It's in the first tone. You've heard it before. And I would love for us to be able to sing that in English. The music exists, the lyrics are there. It's just a matter of practicing it. It's basically 3 sets, 3 couplets that make up a stanza. So we can do like maybe, I think, to cover the time, probably maybe we can do 2 or 3 stanzas by the time everyone receives their andivero and goes over to coffee hour. So that is, I think, the ideal prayer, the hymn that can be sung, and it's very catchy. I mean, I've heard people humming it. I've heard people um, singing it. It's a very beautiful, very appropriate prayer. So, that's something that if Amy doesn't introduce it to you all, I will. And so it'd be kind of neat to sing it maybe together at a Vesper service. By the way, we're going to have Vespers on January 10th. And so I'll be in town for that, for Vespers. And then maybe there we can practice singing that. I can teach you the hymn. We can sing it in English. You can learn the melody and, and then just start using it. So I think that'll be a very beautiful part. The original first part of the hymn, "O Virgin Pure Immaculate," yes, "Agni Parthene Despina." So that would be wonderful to do that. Sandy and John, what is the resolution for the Orthodox Christians to get back? What is the resolution for the Orthodox Christians get back to the biblical practice for Holy Saturday, or maybe other practices that have slowly been changed for convenience? The resolution is, again, for us to not have Holy Saturday morning liturgy, to do liturgy on Holy Saturday afternoon. Um, that is something that I would have to discuss with Metropolitan Savas, because it really needs the hierarch's permission to do that, because the parishes are used to doing Saturday morning liturgy. Now, Metropolitan Savas, I mean, I'd have to discuss it with him. As I think I've told you all already, the Metropolitan will normally, he normally refers to me if there are questions on liturgical matters. I'm the go-to in this metropolis as well as at the Archdiocese. So he may turn around and say, well, um, if you can make a case for it, yeah, just do it and I'll give you permission. But again, I'm a priest, so I'm under his authority. I have to have it pass by him. If he deflects it back to me and says, hey, you're the professor, you know best, then I will create a policy and then maybe um, begin to teach you, and maybe as we're leading up to this next year's Easter, to implement it, which means that people won't be coming Holy Saturday. Now, there's going to be we need to have discussion about this because a lot of people are just used to it, right? So it's a matter of being used to it. Little children, like to come in the morning and receive communion because they can't do the midnight service. But what I'm saying is to do an early afternoon or a mid-afternoon service that little kids can go to on Holy Saturday. And then what about the midnight liturgy? And I would say no midnight liturgy. Do the resurrection service, not at midnight, but very early on Sunday morning. What do Protestant churches do? They have sunrise services. Guess what? That's more Orthodox than what we do. So thank you to the Protestant world for that. Because that's what the early Christians did. They had sunrise services. What they actually did was they had a vigil all through the night. All through the night. All they did was they read from the Passion of Christ. His betrayal, his um, uh, judgment, everything. And then they ended on Sunday morning, really early Sunday morning, with the resurrection accounts. And then the bishop would have the Eucharist, and the service was done. People received communion, done deal. And that's how they celebrated Christmas, how they celebrated Easter. So we could do late, or I should say mid-afternoon service, like I'm guessing 3, 4 o'clock, and then Sunday morning resurrection service, matins, and divine liturgy. And this way we don't ruin the cycle and we keep things, where it is. Now, kids can come to church on Sunday. Kids can come to church on Saturday afternoon. I understand that sometimes people make plans, but if people know ahead of time that these are what the services are going to be, and when they will hear my full-blown explanation for why it should be done this way, I think they'll be more amenable to doing it and planning their Easter celebration accordingly. I would like to see that happening. I do know one other parish actually who does this. Father Dimitri Nikoloudakis out in Lancaster, Reading at St. Matthew's does this. And he had actually consulted me before, and I told him this was under Metropolitan Maximus, and he said, "Can I do this?" And I said, "I think it's wonderful if you can, but you should receive the bishop's blessing to do it." And he did. And Metropolitan Savas apparently has allowed it. And so it's become practice at St. Matthew's to do Saturday evening, Vesperal liturgy of Pascha, and then no midnight service, early morning Sunday, Easter service in the morning. And it's worked out fine. So I will, I can bring the subject up to His Eminence. And like I said, if he throws it back into my lap, which I have a feeling he will, and basically he'll allow it, then we can proceed accordingly. Joseph agrees. Yay, it's my favorite hymn. The original first part of the hymn, yep. And Patrick asks, what do we do on the Sunday of Orthodoxy? So the Sunday of Orthodoxy, we normally have the Divine Liturgy, and at the end of the liturgy, we read and the Sunday of Orthodoxy is the first Sunday of Lent. We normally have the liturgy, and then we have the proclamation of the Synodikon, which is the acceptance of the synodal decision of 787 and the proclamation of 843 to restore the icons to use. Sometimes on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, they do this service in the evening, Sunday evening, which is wrong. We wouldn't have to worry about that. They do that oftentimes for convenience again, and I've discussed this with Metropolitan Savas. If you're going to do the Sunday of Orthodoxy procession with the icons, it should not be done. I mean, we do it Sunday, again, because it's convenient. It normally should be done at Vespers the night before. And so a lot of churches have like Sunday of Orthodoxy celebrations on Sunday. But Sunday night in Lent leads us into Monday morning, leads us into Monday, and we restart the cycle again of fasting. So it's kind of incompatible to have a celebratory service when we're entering into the darkness of the Lenten services on Sunday night. Anyway, that's just a technicality. But that's normally what we do on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. We just do the Sunday procession after liturgy on Sunday. Okay, so a lot of stuff here. Did I answer everyone's question?
I was going to ask a question if I could as well.
Sure, Devin.
I was going to ask, this isn't, well, I'll ask the other question first. I have a shorter question. I'll just ask that first. Is it going to be like 3 o'clock on the 10th-ish, like for like the Vesperal service, or later in the evening, or do you know?
At 3 o'clock?
Yeah, like on the January. Like
on January 10th?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, 3, 4, maybe 4 o'clock. I mean, we want to do it as close to sundown as possible. The days start getting a little longer, but not by much, since the winter solstice is on the 21st. So by the 10th, I was thinking kind of around 4-ish.
Okay, and then I also wanted to ask. So I've seen people. I don't know the circumstances, but like the usage of water on Sunday mornings. Do we just do the way I understand it, we do a full fast from midnight?
Correct. The Roman practice, which is not to eat anything from midnight all the way through the morning until we receive communion. Now, there are some people who may be under a penance who do not commune because they have a penance not to receive communion. So they're given the penance just to have holy water in the morning. And then they can come to church and nothing else. They have holy water, they come to church, they receive their blessed bread. And then they just repeat that until the time comes for them to be able to have Holy Communion. So it kind of depends on the kind of where they are. Yes, Joseph here is asking a question. I'm sorry, Devin, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, sure. During the liturgy, when the choir sings, we lift our hearts up unto the Lord. Is it proper for the congregation to lift up their hands along with the priest? A big fat yes, absolutely. The gesture is one where we know that in liturgy we use our bodies in worship, and using our bodies is not just to make the sign of the cross. We can also lift up our hands, and it is very much encouraged. Some of you may remember the late John Leland. John always did that along with me when at that part of the liturgy. And even when the Lord's Prayer is recited, that's also very proper to lift up our hands in the orans position. This is called the orans position of supplication. So when we do the Lord's Prayer, you may lift up your hands as well. If we do the when we do the let us lift up our hearts, it's appropriate to make this gesture. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing embarrassing. At first, and maybe a few people doing it, and then maybe in time, more and more people will do it. I can also encourage people to do it as well. But yeah, absolutely, you can feel free to do that. Let's finish the chapter. I would like to finish at least chapter 2, and there's just a few verses left. Could someone read for us? But this was such a wonderful tangent. So this was wonderful. Thank you for the questions. Verses 23 through 28. This will finish chapter 2. Can someone read for us?
I can. Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath? But he said to them, Have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him, how he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat except for the priests, and also gave some to those who were with him? And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath.
All right, thank you. So I didn't even look ahead, and there's the message. There's the quote, the famous quote about the Sabbath and man. So here again, and throughout the Gospel of Mark, we see conflict constantly between what the law has taught as a form of discipline and what the spirit of the law, according to Jesus, entails. So he's walking through these grain fields on the Sabbath. We must remember, too, that normally, unless you were making your way to the synagogue, you could not move so many meters or yards outside of your property, of your home's property. If the synagogue was, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a kilometer away, let's say, you could make that go there, but you could not go further than that. And then you would use that same amount of time to go back to your home. In the book of Leviticus, and I believe Numbers too, there are specifications how far you can travel on the Sabbath. And you had to be very, very precise. So what Jesus is doing is he's out in the field, and so he's walking. He's walking farther distances than from his house to the synagogue. He's going through fields and fields of grain. And not only is he walking, which is unlawful to do, but he's also plucking grains from the wheat. And why? Because his disciples were hungry. So Jesus wants to use this as a teaching moment, and he gives them permission to eat. And he does the same as well. And they're eating on the Sabbath, and they're doing it outside of their house. So both of those actions are scandalous. Then the Pharisees, as soon as they exit the wheat, the grain fields, immediately criticize Jesus and the disciples. And Jesus says, hey, he says, I guess you've forgotten what King David, who was very famous and very respected amongst the Jewish people, what King David did when he was hungry, and even on the Sabbath, and those who were with him. What did he do? He went into the, not the inner sanctum, but he went before the Holy of Holies into the altar, and he took the showbread. Now, what is the showbread? Every week, there are 12 loaves of bread. It's almost like the prosphora that we use in liturgy, but of course, it's very, very different. The showbread, each showbread is like a round loaf, and each showbread represents one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this showbread is placed on a table before the Holy of Holies, but next to the altar of incense. The priests would go in once a week and they would consume the showbread. It wasn't refrigerated. It was placed on a table, and the temple itself, the altar area where the priests would go in, the people were not allowed. And this was not the Holy of Holies either. This was in front of the Holy of Holies. This was an airtight area, so insects, nothing could get in. They would cover this bread usually with special towels, and then the priest who was on duty that week would go in, or priests would go in, and they would take the bread and they would eat the showbread. The showbread represented one of the 12 tribes of Israel, each of them. The showbread was there so that God, who was in the Holy of Holies, in the temple, would bring his sanctifying grace and bless the people that belonged to those tribes, to those 12 tribes, through the bread. If you think about it, it's very interesting, because when the priest is commemorating names using the bread that is baked, every time he cuts a piece, he remembers a person by name. So it's very, very similar to what the Jews would do. But of course, it's a completely different system of commemoration. So they would do this. And so what did David do? David was hungry, and the people who were with him, so they made their way into the temple. They go into the temple. They go into the altar. They take the bread. They knew there was bread there because of the tradition, and they start eating that bread. If that bread is not eaten, it's going to mold, and it can't be thrown away. It has to be consumed, because it's important that after the weekly blessing that God gives to the people of Israel, that this bread is consumed, and then new bread is made, and another 12 loaves is placed there for the next cycle, for the next weeks, for the next priest who has his tour of duty, his rotation to consume those gifts. So what happens here is Jesus talks about David doing this, and he says, yeah, and let me tell you who the high priest was then. And he mentions him by name. And he ate the showbread, and he says, it is not lawful for anyone to eat this except for the priests. And not only did he eat it, but he also gave it to those who were with him, because there was a need. The need was hunger. The bread is symbolic, but the bread can be made again. The bread can be consumed, and then it can be made again. But if there is a need and people are hungry, you can't make people again. You can't make the same person again. So God is willing to break a law that he himself established when a need arises. And then Jesus goes on to say, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Remember that God himself gives the commandment to honor the Sabbath. But God himself can also modify that commandment. How do we honor the Sabbath? Do we follow a set of rules, or do we do good on the day when we're supposed to glorify God? By doing good, do we not glorify God to the extreme? And that is why Jesus says, and in another place, I think we saw this already, the man with the withered hand. What is the right thing to do on the Sabbath? To give life or to take it away? To do good or to do evil? And when no one responded, Jesus looked indignantly on them. He was angry at them. And he says to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he heals him on the Sabbath day. Because the answer is, we're not slaves to rules. God has given us rules, but in circumstances when a need arises, like a person needs to be healed, God himself will suspend those rules, not man. God will suspend the rules, and God will do the miracle on the day that he specifies. The miracle of all of this is that, and this is an important lesson, it applies for fasting, when we're fasting. Um, it is important to follow the rules. Yes, it is. However, however, if we at any moment during our fast are not praying and simply following rules, then we're simply dieting. If we are praying and realize that we're fasting because we love God, because we want to become better people so that we can help others, not to become better people so that I can be better than someone else. I want to fast and I want to pray because I want to be a good Christian. I want to be a good soldier. I want to be someone who is pleasing to God. To be pleasing to God, to be good means to do good for someone else. If I'm doing it for myself, then I become a slave to the law. And St. Paul is very, very clear about this. But if we're doing it because we want to extend ourselves to the other, then our fasting, our following of rules, is blessed by God. If we're just fasting because so and so elders said that, and people are funny, because the elders will say exactly kind of what I've said here. They'll say that, yes, we must fast, but we must also pray, and our hearts must be light. We cannot, no elder is going to say, these are the rules because this is what we've learned. No, they're going to say, these are rules that we follow, but we must couple them with prayer, and we must have our hearts light. What is the spirit of the law? The spirit of the law is for the law not to be law, but for the law to become joy. If there is no joy in fasting, don't. I'd rather have you eat filet mignon on Good Friday than fast and hurt other people. Fasting is a waste of time if that's the attitude we have, that we just want to follow the rules because we want to be holy. It's not going to work. It's better not to fast then. But we must make the effort, and we must have a spirit of prayer inside of us and a spirit of love for the other. That's the important thing. And that's what Jesus is saying. The Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath, meaning the Son of God, God himself, the incarnate word. I gave you the law, and now I suspend the law because there is a need. Love must take precedence. No love, no fasting. No love, no prayer, no fasting. Love is the absolute requirement to do anything in the church. And that may sound radical, and it is because Jesus was a radical. So I'll stop there. Any questions on this final part of the Bible, of the scripture? Any thoughts or any clarifications that I can offer? Okay, if not, I want to thank all of you for your patience. We covered a lot of ground tonight, especially with fasting practices. I do want to apologize if I sounded like I was coming across a little harsh, but you have to understand that I'm human too, like everybody, and as an academic, I also become somewhat intolerant of not of people, not of people, but sometimes of clergy who don't, and not all clergy, because most of our clergy are wonderful men. But sometimes, you run across some people that have kind of different thought patterns, but it's important for us, if we are Orthodox, it's important for us to do things properly and never to shortchange our people. Give our people the food and the spiritual nourishment that they need to understand and to guide them lovingly in the way of Christ, right? So again, I apologize if I came across a little harsh, but again, just blame that on my title. hopefully this was helpful. I will post this so it will be on the website, on the YouTube page. And this will be our final Bible study. So we are going to break until after the New Year's, and we will be picking up next Wednesday, the 17th. We will have Akathist that Desi is leading. So that will be next. Desi, is it next Wednesday at 7, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that will be at the church. So please, if you're able to come for that. And then we're going to break, and then the 24th is Christmas Eve, so there's no Bible study then, and nothing on the 31st either. So we'll just pick up, I think, on January 7th. And I think January 7th will be our Bible study. I think that's what we said.
Yep.
Yeah, January 7th, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That will be Bible study at 7. And then on the 14th, Akathist, 21st, Bible study, 28th, Akathist, and then every other week. So thank you all. Hope this was helpful. And hopefully I'll see all of you again for the holidays. Please remember His Eminence is coming to our community with Archdeacon Ryan on this coming Sunday. We're expecting a pretty large group. It's going to be a tremendous opportunity for us to see our spiritual father again, and for all of you to introduce yourselves to him. He's very much a people's person, and you'll love him to death. He's an amazing man. So he'll be with us on Sunday. It's going to be a pretty long day, pretty full day, but a very fun day as well. So God bless you all, and hope to see you all soon. Thanks.
Father.
Yes.
Father, good night.
Good night.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. And then, Father, I just wanted to ask once more for this coming Sunday.
Mhm.
So when we take the opportunity to talk to the Metropolitan about all that, did you want to wait until after, did you want to do Carol first, and that way we could talk about that afterward, or I don't know.
Oh, I think so. I mean, as far as the tantras go, that'll be in church. He'll do that in church. I'm thinking he'll probably want to talk privately with her for her situation, and then for me to introduce you to him. I'm kind of guessing towards the end, like after the kids finish with the pageant. That'll give him some free time, I think, to meet with people. He said he's going to spend the whole afternoon with us. So hopefully that'll be enough time for him to also to get to know you and talk to Carol and Joseph as well, I know. So yeah, let's just kind of wait until after the pageant's over.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he'll be the email that I got said that he's going to spend like the afternoon with us because he does have a funeral on Monday, but he's not going from the night before. I think it's in Youngstown, so he'll go back home and then drive to Youngstown for the funeral on Monday morning. But Sunday he's going to be with us. That's what I know.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much, Father.
Thank you, Devin. Yep.
You have a good night.
Good night.